to look at what this, at the size of this divide between, let's say, Republicans and Democrats, and how could it be that 74 million Americans have voted for Donald Trump after 4 years when they've seen who he is? I mean, I think we're all asking that one. There was a really interesting, just to back up on the divide itself, a really interesting survey that came out a year ago, looking at how Democrats as a group understand Republicans and how Republicans understand Democrats. And in one of the items, it asked Democrats, how many Republicans do you think racism is still a problem today? And the Democrats estimated, half, 50%. Actually, it was 80%. And then Republicans were asked, well, how many Democrats do you think that most policemen are bad people? And Republicans estimated half. Actually, it's 15%. So not only do we disagree, but we don't even agree on what we disagree about. It's that bad. And since I began doing research on the Deep South Tea Party enthusiasts, now Trump enthusiasts in the middle of Louisiana, since that time, I think the sides have hardened because there is a Trump effect. I mean, he's been trying to divide, and he has been successful in this. So that's where to start with. One other point, this survey, and I wrote an op-ed for The Guardian on this last year, you could look it up, found that Democrats were worse at predicting what Republicans thought than Republicans were in predicting what Democrats thought. In other words, and education didn't help. And so I scratched my head on that one. How could it be? I mean, we're the more curious ones. We're reaching out. Don't we know more? No, we don't. Because we're more likely to live in big cities that are enclaves. We don't mean to be enclave. We don't mean to we don't believe in bubbles, even political bubbles, but we're more in those bubbles because we're urban on the whole. So that's to start with. And the point I think we can draw from that is that the shoe is on our foot. It's in our interest to get out there and get what the mindset of that 74 million people, nearly half the country. So I guess the next thing I'd like to say is that we have an image of the Trump supporter that I would describe as sitting pretty. You know, a lot of people on the left will say, oh, those people that voted for Trump, they have a red MAGA hat, they're pumping, their signs, they're sitting pretty, right? They have it, they want to hold on to it. That's I think the first image, certainly the one I started with. There are some like that, but on the whole, all the interviews I've done, and a lot in 5 years in the heartland of Trump in southern Louisiana around the petrochemical industry, and now I'm doing work in Appalachia, in eastern Kentucky, and the sitting pretty image describes very few other people I'm getting to know. The next kind of image that I think comes to mind popularly is the wealthy guardian. You remember in the Trump campaign, this St. Louis couple, the McCloskeys, that were brandishing guns against Black Lives Matter protesters, marchers. I see a little of that, and that's a kind of major image. but I don't think that's who I'm seeing. So there's this third image that I'm actually in the process of trying to get clear on myself. So we're all thinkers and explorers here, but I'll tell you what my journey is leading me to think. It's that a lot of white people, and by white people that I'm focusing on, are blue collar, high school educated. They don't have college, and they're Christian, and not all Pentecostal. And right now I'm doing interviews for people in the hollers of Eastern Kentucky. And they feel like a minority group. I know this sounds hard to believe, but they feel like a kind of minority group themselves. And they actually feel that life is rigged against them. They get their picture of reality from not only Fox News, but they'll tune in to CNN, MSNBC, sometimes just to taste what the other side thinks, but also, to kind of be interested. And what they see there, they say, oh, look at all the people of color that are newscasters and, weather people, and no white men anymore, gosh. And then they see Black football stars and basketball stars getting multi-million-dollar deals to advertise stuff. And they think, wow, they're millionaires, they're billionaires. Gosh, those Blacks are really getting ahead. So they haven't taken some course in ethnic studies in college, right? They're looking at the media, and this is kind of the impression they get. And they also, when they went to high school, they would see that there was a special room for the Chicano studies people and African Americans. And they said, what about us whites? We don't have a special club. And if we did, we'd be seen as racist. So there's a sense of being left out. Now, not everybody is really abjectly poor, but I have talked to people who were pretty close. And here was what one guy said to me. He was born in a trailer park, and he said, well, my mom and dad wouldn't let me get out because there were just drugs everywhere. My uncle was dealing in the backyard, and there's a murder 3 trailers down. He said, and he had been in special ed in the high school. He said, I'm poor and I'm dumb, he said. And he was very angry at the left. He was, but more left than right. He was in the middle. And so
single election, right? I do a lot of research in the elections. I do research in the elections field. I talk to a lot of reporters in my work every election cycle. And I always get questions, well-intended reporters, of course. The burning questions that are out there are always, what is the strength going to be of the Latino vote this year? What will it be of the Asian Americans or African Americans? Will young people finally turn out to vote and be the decisive factor in this election? And there's always that inquiry up front, but the expectations are often based not on a realistic kind of understanding of what to expect in turnout of particularly historically underrepresented groups. So what happens is, come election day or after election day, there's always some degree of disappointment, no matter who won the election. Why didn't Latinos turn out more? Why didn't young people? Oh my gosh, we saw this in 2016, right? Many conversations, media and other places, saying, young people failed. If they had just turned out, right, Trump wouldn't have won, that sort of thing. It's a narrative that really sets groups up to fail. And we really should expect it, right? And work, I would argue, to counter it. And I do in my work when I talk to reporters or I do panels or presentations. I'm really cautioning people to understand if they're looking for a jump in the Latino vote or a jump in the youth vote, what are they really expecting? If they're expecting numbers to be anywhere close to whites, for instance, or young to be closer to older voters, that's not going to happen, right? Disparities are entrenched in our electoral system, which I'll talk about in a moment. So the media play a role in setting up this narrative and how things are talked about afterwards, certainly. And also, if we see low turnout, kind of regardless of who won the race, there should be a set of conversations around why there's that low turnout. And often the group that quote unquote fails is blamed somehow internally, right? That they were apathetic. They young people didn't care. What happened? Latinos weren't the sleeping giant. How could an African-American voter vote for Trump? That sort of thing. As opposed to understanding, again, the nuances amongst groups and why they support candidates and not. And then if his overall turnout is not as high as we expect, understanding the very significant barriers that are in place for groups to participate, right? And understanding why turnout is lower. So the other point I want to make here up front is that it really wasn't half of America that or nearly half of America that voted for Donald Trump, right? We know that about 85 million eligible voters, adult citizens, didn't turn out, even in this incredibly high, historically, turnout. We want to see turnout always higher, but 67% is historically high, unfortunately, I would say, because obviously we want that to be even bigger. So 85 million Americans that didn't turn out. So if you do the numbers, really, Trump received about roughly 31% of the country's eligible voters. Biden got about 33% of the eligible voters. So we can walk away from that and say, how could half of America, right, on either end? But here's also something very important to note, is that those that didn't vote, right, the voting electorate is not representative of the U.S. population. It is older, whiter, wealthier, more educated. But definitely in terms of race ethnicity, it is whiter. In every state, then, of course, in California, we're more diverse, but it's always whiter than the population is. So the whites are always overrepresented amongst voters than they are a part of the population. It varies across states, but we know this. And for those that don't vote, they have very different preferences, policy preferences for candidates. So this has already been noted in the exit polls. And remember, exit polls are of voters, right? And they are historically, consistently problematic for voters of color and young people. We want to say that. So we know that, but they're at least initially after an election, the best that we have in terms of data. But of voters, right, we know that overwhelmingly voters of color, there was variation, but as a group, right, supported Biden over Trump. And we might suspect that of the population, not just of voters of color, that would be even more so. But here, just, if only whites voted, we know from the exit polls, 58% of white voters supported Trump in this election. Overwhelming voters of color, as I said, supported Biden. Let's talk about California for a second, though. And these numbers have evolved since Election Day. They keep updating these are just CNN exit polls. Obviously, there's a few